Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Select Board meeting for September 5th, 2017. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so we can get started. We have a thunderstorm outside. This is a good time for folks who were thinking of living in Florida to realize how nice it is to be up here, not looking at it. They said 185-mile-an-hour winds on this right now. So we'll just get a little bit of rain. All right. I guess the first thing we should start with is any announcements?
I do have one.
Yep.
Tom, So there's going to be a flyover for Eversource to check their transmission lines. This happens annually. And so there'll be a helicopter essentially hovering above the Long Meadow East Long Meadow line, inspecting the transmission lines. So if you see a helicopter between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m., weather permitting, on Tuesday the 5th, Wednesday the 6th, and then the rain date would be the 7th. So I didn't hear it happen today, so I'm not sure if it did, but they'll be out there flying. So just if you see the helicopter, that's what they're doing. Like I said, that's an annual inspection that they do.
Okay, so we won't have to panic
No.
about that. Okay, any announcements from anyone on the Select Board? No? Okay, then we can go to resident comments, if we have any. Yes, step up, state your name and your address to start.
My name is Patrick Carnahan, 311 Farmington Road, here in Long Meadow. And I would like to, I'm here tonight to express my disappointment with this board on matters related to the May 2017 town meeting. Specifically, I'm here to express my displeasure with the lack of action on Article 42, which was passed by an affirmative vote, majority vote. And that article specifically was about the parklands in Bliss and Laurel Parks. And that article requested and required the town to file the proper legal paperwork affirming the status of those parks as parklands. Even though Executive Office of Environmental Affairs considered them parkland, there was a deed that was never filed in 1934, and that warrant article merely asked the town to file the proper paperwork, the deed, the affirmative deed. That has not happened. So I'm a little bit disappointed in that. Let me read something from Bill Gavin's homepage for the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's the Citizens Guide to Town Meetings. It says, the purest form of democratic governing is practiced in a town meeting. It has been used for over 300 years in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it's an effective way of governing town operations. The purest form of democratic governing. It's interesting because the majority of the people at town meeting voted for this article. They've said yay, and yet here we sit, and no action has been taken. And then I read an article in the Long Meadow News that says, well, maybe the citizens don't really understand the article. Maybe they're not smart enough to understand the article. Maybe they don't have the inside knowledge on what this article really means. So we're going to hold off any action on that because maybe some other people know better than the citizens. It doesn't really strike me as the most democratic form of governance. It seems that's a usurping of the democratic form of governance, and I would probably question the common sense approach like that. I'm not going to use the word legality. I don't know, but I think it's wrong. I've reviewed 47 or 43A, the Commonwealth procedures on town meeting management, and nowhere in that does it say that articles that are passed in town meeting are arbitrarily acted upon. It's the majority rules, and this was a simple majority vote. It wasn't a supermajority, simple majority vote, and it passed, and yet nothing's happened. So when I read a little bit more in the Long Meadow News article, it gave me some idea about maybe the mindset of some members of the Select Board of why this wasn't done. And I understand it has to do with future income, and if you take this land out of taxation rolls, any future development, then maybe that'll adversely affect the town with reduced taxation. And I get that, I really do. But The Executive Office of Environmental Affairs already considers it's parkland. You can't just build willy-nilly on it anyway. All we're asking is that the deed be filed affirming that fact, which should have been done in 1934. Furthermore, there is a process by which 97 land can be taken out of 97 status and developed. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. It's intentionally cumbersome because the state wants to protect the land as open space. But there is a process, and I'm just going to tell you briefly what this process is. It's pretty simple, and I actually created a little copy here for everybody so I can give it to you afterwards. It's very simple. Municipal Conservation Commission must vote that the land is no longer needed. Municipal Park Commission must vote that the parkland in question is no longer needed as parkland. Town meeting must vote to remove the land from protected status. That would be a 2/3 majority vote. Then the municipality must file with EEO, the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, to remove, that they're going to remove the status of the land as protected land, and then it goes to the state legislature where a 2/3 vote has to pass and it's signed by the governor. Sure, it's cumbersome, but it can be done. Okay, so, and the point of that is that if there's some future development, let's say Long Meadow's up to the 25 per thousand valuation and we're struggling, we're laying off teachers and all, that the town can come together and say, maybe this parkland does need to be developed in some way, shape, or form for further income because now we're in a bind. So that is the mechanism in place that allows that to happen. So it isn't as bleak as the Long Meadow News article said. So there is that mechanism in place. And I'm going to close now by just saying I would really like the town governance to really consider the purpose of town meeting and how that's supposed to be run and really follow that a little more. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your comments. We don't get into a debate at this point, but I would say that there was a letter we got in our packet that was sent to the Attorney General's office, and so once that kind of process is initiated, then it slows us down also. And so we may have the oldest, purest form of government, democratic government, but it's always a slower process than one group might care to have. And so we refer to our council. Now we have to wait and hear from the Attorney General's office, and then we will be voting on it. We're not trying to avoid it, but thank you for keeping it in our
I would
focus.
say,
Yeah.
my view is that I get that the town voted, and I think that something should be done about it. I don't think we're not ignoring it, but my view is that would actually be a conveyance. If it's under Chapter 97 or Article 97, that's a conveyance. So that's why I wanted to have town council review it and get their opinion and direction before we just decide it ourselves, so that it's done legally and properly.
Right, and that's, I think, what the article intended. It said to file the proper legal instruments, recognizing the parkland as parkland, whatever those legal instruments are. I'm not a tax attorney or a land attorney or a conservation attorney. That's why we have town councils and councils to
Right,
review those things.
I think we're supposed to have his opinion in a week or two.
Well, I think that's where he's been copied on the article, on the letter to the Attorney General, so now it's in the AG's office's hands. There's no sense in town council opining on it if the Attorney General's gonna tell us what the actual,
Right.
what they think the opinion is. And if I could just add, since we're kind of
Yeah.
freewheeling here, I just want to say, for Pat's purposes, the disappointment or lack of action should be directed at me. And it wasn't an attempt to block or prevent or somehow undermine the will of town meeting. I do believe there is a valid public policy discussion to be had at the select board level to find out, and this is a good example, but for any citizen's petition, is that if our town council indicates, hey, there may be some legal questions as to what the select board's obligations, we should answer those regardless of how you feel, no matter what the article says. Just that very thing, let's sort that out first, like you said, do it right. The reason why we're in August talking about it is simply because the town government had 36 articles on that warrant, and then there was a bunch of citizens petitions after that. We had 2 nights of town meeting, and it just hadn't had its turn yet in the queue to address, and that is 100% on me, because I'm the one that's supposed to produce the stuff that gives the select board the opportunity to consider things. So disappointment should be with me, and I apologize to all the citizens who signed the petition in support of this, that the lack of action was really just a lack of time and attention on my part.
Okay, well, thank you. And we'll be coming back to this. I don't know if there's, I didn't want you to feel neglected.
Did you want me to give you
So-
this so you could just distribute it? I mean, you probably have seen it already, but it's the disposition matters. with-
Sure, no, that would be helpful. Why don't you give it to Deb,
Sure. I'll give it
Deb
to you.
House, and she'll make copies and send it to us. Just so, because it clearly spells out the process of reversing this, and it involves the governor being involved and all that, so. Oh, you have copies for everyone? Oh, okay, great.
And the governor was involved in creating parkland in the first place. It went to the state legislature for a vote. They voted for that to occur back in 1934.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll we'll look more into this for sure. And the next thing we would have is the town manager's report.
No select board comments?
Oh, yeah, no, select board comments. Are there any select board comments that we have this evening? I can't think of anything that I'm supposed to have, but I do know that, the issue on the table before us with the parkland is a difficult one because, there's active versus passive recreation, and I'm a big fan of saving places that are quiet and undisturbed. But I also see the struggle of, certain projects getting off the ground if we have to buy property in this town in the future to build those. So we'll talk more about it. So then I guess we can go to our town manager.
Great, thank you, Tom. So the first item I had in my town manager's report was the note to the board that that letter had been, in fact, sent to the Attorney General's office, and that was going to, and I'll be honest, I have not doubled back with town council other than to confirm that he has received it and he is working on it. I did include a community compact application that I submitted on behalf of the town. We are a compact community. We're currently engaged in 3 best practices, one of which we received a grant from the state for. Once we've completed those, which I would expect to be in the next month or so, the police accreditation, older driver safety, and multimodal, I think, safety, like bikes, pedestrians, things like that. They're basically two traffic safety ones and the police accreditation. Once we get through those, we can apply, we can be considered for additional ones. I will tell you that since I submitted the first one for regionalization of certain inspectional services,
Right.
which is something we've talked about quite a bit. Beverly Hirschhorn, our really outstanding Board of Health Director, I've given her directive to look at working with East Long Meadow and other surrounding communities on things like pool inspections. Like, are there companies that do pool inspections? So she can be out focusing on our community's health needs, not taking water samples, in public and private pools. So we're working on that at a micro level, but her efforts on that have kind of highlighted the challenge in really regionalizing, because there really aren't vendors that are easily found that do this type of thing. But if you had 2 towns or 3 towns working together, someone would figure it out, and maybe you want to do it on a private basis. So that's the first one. The second one I asked them to consider was a best practice for OPEB discussions, and really it was a long shot to begin with, but I felt like if the administration is doing anything with the municipalities, the first, second, and third thing they should be talking about are retiree health costs. And so regionalization and traffic safety are really important things. We do spend a lot of time on those, but to really have meaningful interaction with the municipalities, you're going to need to be talking about retiree health, pension costs, things like that. So I put that on there as kind of a thing, like, let's keep this at the top of the priority list. I forwarded it to you before the meeting tonight, but I did receive correspondence from the community compact office, the person who represents the program at the state, and they basically said the OPEB one's not going to fly. So I'm going to go back to the drawing board and see if there's another best practice we can look at. The one thing I'll tell you is one of the reasons why it's sometimes a challenge to find a best practice that really fits us is because we are already doing quite a bit of regionalization, and we're ahead of the curve on a lot of these. And so when they promote best practices, we're like, well, we're already kind of doing that. But we'll keep at it. It's a good program. We've benefited from it, so we will keep pushing on that.
So Stephen, if we regionalize with the health department, So would East Long Meadow, if they worked with us, they would contribute half the salary?
Well,
That
it's
current
not
individual?
necessarily health agent, like, I'm not talking about combining Beverly Hirschhorn's position with another. There are certain inspections she does that I'm trying to
Okay.
outsource the inspections.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And maybe, because when you consolidate positions between two towns, it takes an intermunicipal agreement,
Yeah.
and that's kind of a challenge. The other thing is, it always depends, someone could lose their job, ideally you do it by attrition.
Mhm.
So you try and time things so when you're getting ready to make that combination, somebody's ready for retirement or moving on to a different job.
Mhm.
But, a lot of it though is who's gonna be doing our inspections if we're sharing, and that person can't be in two places at once. So you can't, very rarely can you eliminate two positions into one and then get the same level of service. I mean, there's a timeliness for inspections that you need. Kitchens can get closed down if they don't meet certain, criteria, and then the re-inspection needs to happen promptly so they can reopen. So it's things like that we're looking at, but again, it's a much more, it's a simple concept with often complicated execution when I say regionalization and privatization. So I'm hoping for best practices to point us in that direction. So then, and the other thing is, part of it is also building inspections too. Like, we need to have a building inspector, but, can we combine? And we do share with East Long Meadow quite a bit in that regard. So we had the application date for library executive director position. As you know, Karen Kappenman is retiring. And so we did receive 16 applications for that position. We're in the process of reviewing the applications, and we'll be working with a representative from the Library Board of Trustees to interview some finalists and hopefully make an announcement sometime in early October. And that position will be subject to select board confirmation
Oh,
as a
okay,
department head.
Right.
We did have our outreach coordinator, Michael Squindo, has resigned to go be the Council on Aging Director in Agawam, so we wish Mike well. We're in the process of posting that position, and we'll be going through that screening process. He's done, I think, next week.
Mhm.
And then, actually, I just found out now, and learned late last week that we were going to do the balloon test for the proposed cell tower at the Lynn tennis courts.
Mhm.
But I found out that there's a process you have to go through. When we did one, there was one done by Verizon a few years ago, and they just kind of did it just on their own, just as a test case. This one, we have a bylaw that requires an application to be filed and a legal filing and certain deadlines. And so we're going to hold off on the balloon test so we can comply with those filing deadlines. So it won't be probably for a few more weeks.
And the balloon test would just be to go up to the height that the cell tower would be,
Right.
and so we
Yep.
get an idea.
Yeah, it would just be, and actually they're going to use a crane, not me, actual crane.
Okay,
And
not Stephen Crane.
so you can get a sense of how tall 150 feet is.
Oh, okay.
And actually, it's a little different because instead of the monopole with the antenna all sticking off, it's going to look like a big giant flagpole.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not quite as obvious as some of the older cell towers are. So that'll happen, and then they have to go through their permitting process at the local level, and we hope to have some public engagement about that as we go forward. And then, as you may know, the planning board will be having a site. They'll consider a waiver of site plan. Long Meadow Country Club is going to be doing a fairly significant renovation. It's a significant renovation, but they're going to end up with just about the same amount of space they have now. It's really a modernization of their facilities. We're working with them, and we have a drainage issue that we're looking to address in partnership with the country club as well. So that's something that we'll be spending a little bit of time on. And just Bay Path contributed their third out of 5 installments for their contribution to the Quinn. So I want to thank Bay Path again for their contribution.
Okay, and that was $10,000.
They made a pledge of 50 and 5 payments of 10.
Okay, great. Yes.
Steve, just a question maybe for Paul Sturzik. Is that payment from Bay Path going to the general fund? That's it. Okay, thank
Right. But it was.
The answer was
for
yes for the viewing audience at
Yeah,
home.
but it was, they decided to do this as a response to the fire truck, the Quint truck, is that?
Yeah, it was when we were contemplating buying it. purchasing it through capital, the select board had given me a directive to go out and see if we could raise some funds privately, and JGS, Bay Path, and Glen Meadow Retirement Community all generously contributed at various levels. So we thank Bay Path for their contribution.
Great. Okay, any other questions on the report, the town manager? Okay. We'll go to old business, the approval of the minutes of August 21st.
I'll move we approve the minutes of the August 21st, 2017 select board meeting.
Okay, do we get a
Second.
second? Okay, the only thing is, I do have an amendment. It's a minor thing. And it is, we were talking about, I should have, there we go. Should have been new business. It was just about we talked about increasing giving the incentive to the town manager. Under number 3 on old business, it would just say, in the discussion, Mr. Lacuse explained the select board looked at all that had been accomplished over the past year by the town manager, instead of, it just says all that had been over the past year, so just one word, you put accomplished in there.
I haven't found it yet.
Under old business, number 3,
Old business?
yep,
Okay.
and then it's number 3, and it says, discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says, so there's just, it's a little awkward reading. It says, look at all that had been accomplished over the past year. So accomplished is missing. So, I don't know if I need to,
Yeah, why don't we, I'll just change my motion to approve the minutes as amended by Mr. Lacuse.
okay, anyway, second. Okay. All in favor? All right, great, thank you. All right, the next order of business will be, let me get this out of the way here.
Gas leak legislation.
The gas leak legislation vote, and so we've all had time to look over both of the bills for the state and for the House, for the Senate and the House. So I guess I'd be looking for a motion to approve the letter.
Well,
Stephen,
just
do
if
you
you can
wanna-
get a motion, I can talk about the letter in discussion.
In the discussion, okay. Do I have a motion to?
I make the motion that we accept the letter of recommendation for the gas leak legislation. I mean,
Okay,
all for that.
and second?
Second.
All right, open for discussion. And Stephen, you want?
So, based on the conversation we had last meeting, I did go and do additional research. I do want to thank Senator Lesser's office for assisting in getting kind of a bill summary and some other information. And so the draft letter you have in your packet, which as proposed would go out under Tom as the chair's signature on behalf of the select board, basically talks about what the bill does and why it's important for the town to protect ratepayers in making sure that unaccounted for gas through leaks does not get passed on to their charges. So that's where most of this information came from, really a bill summary by some of the bill's authors.
Okay. Yes, Stephen.
I just
Sorry,
wanted
Mark.
to note with some issue, I plan to vote for this, but it is noteworthy that were this to come forward to us from the town residents about water, whether we'd really be thrilled about eating the amount of water that's lost in our water pipes. And so there's some danger in making utilities, eat the cost of losses. The difference between water and gas, and the reason I'm voting for this is because gas blows up and water just kind of seeps into the ground. And so I think there's something beyond just the cost of it. And I think the intent of this bill is a safety bill as opposed to a financial bill. But it is an interesting analogy, I think.
I thought about that too, to be honest with you, Mark. And I guess if I could respond, the different, and maybe I'm just justifying, but the difference is, if the townspeople don't think they should be charged, well, first of all, we have to monitor our unaccounted water far more than apparently the gas companies have had to account for their unaccounted, their lost gas for many years. I mean, just accounting for it is a relatively new thing. And so they immediately went from accounting for it to passing it through. If our water customers don't like the fact that they're charged for unaccounted water, they could conceptually put in a new water and sewer commission. Whereas there's no accountability at that level for this. That we have to have the legislature create that accountability for the utility companies. And that's where I think it's important, and I agree with you. There's a lot more danger in unaccounted leaking gas than there is water.
Yeah, so, yeah, and in the letter, it talks about some of the problems that are caused by gas leaks, human health, killing trees, release of methane, affecting greenhouse gas and so forth. So, any other discussion? All right, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Okay, so it's approved. And we will go to the Energy Task Force change of composition vote. And this was something that came up basically because we have an opening, and we have one person who is from a group that's not on the original list. So I guess we could look at the Energy Task Force policy. So the mission statement is pretty clear that we work to enact policies and investments that decrease consumption of energy and resources while encouraging the use of alternative energy sources. So this committee task force basically had one member of the select board, 2 members of the school committee, a member of the recycling committee, and a member of the and a member appointed by the select board, a member appointed by the school committee, and a member of the planning board. And so and the person who wants to be on there is, or the new board we want to add to it is, what board? Is it the plan? No.
Conservation Commission.
Conservation Commission. So I guess we'd have to make a motion to change this membership to include, we could add either to have one person from the Conservation Commission also appointed to this.
Well, has the select board made their appointment?
Yeah, Marie is our
Oh,
representative, isn't she?
she's the member of the select board.
Right,
Yeah.
But there's also a select board appointee.
Yeah, right. I can't think of his name.
Isn't it David Miller? No?
It's the other.
okay, just seeing if it was done,
No.
if that would handle that.
Right, if they just, we did that. Well, maybe the other thing we could do is we could, if the board, we could change the wording to say if the board does not have a full membership, the select board can appoint an additional person. That's a good way to approach it. How's that sound, Mark? I'm getting nods on this side.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that. The other thing we could clearly do is establish a core membership, plus the other members shall be, 3 of the 5 or something like that, that allows people to come and go and represent different organizations. And that, so you say it will be a member of the select board, will be 2 members of the school committee, it will be a member of the recycling committee, and then we'll have 3 members to be appointed from any one of the following. 3 additional members who will be either appointed by the select board, appointed by the school committee, a member of the planning board, a member of the conservation commission. That way we've got a group of 7, but we've got some
Right.
flexibility. In other words, I wouldn't want to replace somebody with somebody from the conservation commission, but right now it just so happens that the planning board didn't appoint somebody, so the conservation commission gets their shot. And if the next time things come around, we'll get 7 other people. That's just a different way of looking at it, though.
Yeah.
I think they want to expand the number of committee members and positions. Isn't that the goal?
I thought
I
we-
don't think so, because I thought there was not,
The
there
issue
wasn't a
is that
person from the
they,
planning board.
nobody from the planning commission, and there's somebody
Yeah.
from the conservation commission who's interested.
Right.
I mean, there's really no, I've never really understood why a member of the planning board was on there anyway, to be honest with you.
Well, because in theory, they're planning.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, they're more of a regulatory body than a planning, than a planning group. But when it comes time to, if we were gonna draft general bylaws or zoning bylaws that were gonna contemplate energy usage, they would be involved, I suppose.
Well, and we did that, Steve, and when we did the Green Communities program.
The solar bylaw, yeah, the
And
solar
so
bylaw.
it did, it was worthwhile having
Yeah.
somebody from the planning board on there, so. Tom, the bottom line is I don't have a preference of the way we do it.
okay. But we could write that. So it would be, so we have the first members, member of the select board, 2 members of the school committee, member of the recycling committee, and then we could say, and 4 additional members, 1 appointed by the select board, or no, 3 additional members, 1 who may be either appointed by the select board, the school committee, the planning board, or the conservation commission.
Right.
Right? We could say
I
that.
would just add zoning board of appeals to that list, because if you're gonna include
Okay.
planning board and
Okay.
Concom as regulatory bodies, you might as well have the ZBA on there.
Okay. All right, so do we need to repeat that as a motion?
Yeah, we probably do.
Should I repeat it, or should someone else make the motion? Doesn't matter.
Do we definitely need somebody from the recycling committee?
Yeah.
We have, but
Well, I would think so, because it's
energy?
because it's an energy sort of thing, because of the Energy Task Force. Recycling is probably seen as wanting to address that. Yeah, I don't think we should eliminate anybody, but we could add, if we had 3 additional members from either the board, our member appointed, school committee appointed, and then for the planning, conservation, or zoning board.
Okay, you just said, I'll move Tom's comments.
He'll move my, okay, and we have a second on that?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion?
You got that, Debbie?
You know what?
Pretty much, I can.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay, so it passes, so we'll make that change, and that'll be good. And then the next thing would be the water sewer rate presentation, which we have our consultant here, who was, we've been waiting with bated breath for this information, and thank you for sending us an email packet with plenty of data to go over. And if you could, I guess you should have a seat, and, or you have stuff
Is it okay
to
to-
pass out? Oh, yeah, sure. It's always good to have, I like hard copy. And then you could
This is the same thing
just
we got this week.
introduce yourself, please.
James, this is the same thing that you'd sent
The
electronically?
memo is the same, the copy of the PowerPoint.
Okay.
I wasn't sure how this was gonna work with
Okay, great.
Oh, okay.
the audience and the select board this evening. But, while James is getting set up back there for us, just introduce myself, Dave Prickett with DPC.
Mhm.
Just want to disclose to those of you that don't know me, I'm a Long Meadow resident, 22 Northfield Road, and obviously a water and sewer customer, so take that as what it's worth. But this evening, we'll kind of go through, I think, what we envision as the first in, potentially a series of steps and discussions.
Okay.
This is a lot to absorb in an initial sit-down, but we'll do our best this evening to try to narrow the focus of what those items most important to the select board are. So, again, this is James Rivers. With any good, say again? Oh, sure. James did a lot of the data crunching for the team, so he's here this evening for those of you that may have already drilled down in some of the data and can help answer some of those questions.
Okay, great.
So a few things we'll cover this evening in the presentation. Again, the focus tonight is going to be mostly on the whole concept of second meters, the sewer kind of focus of the water and sewer rates. Later on, after those issues are addressed, we'll, in a future workshop with staff and select board, talk about kind of some of how your capital plan will integrate into your projected rates over the next 5 to 10 years. So tonight, again, we'll focus on sewer. We'll talk about not only your current sewer rate system, but some alternative concepts, some of which may be more appealing to some groups over others, and some just maybe too many changes to what your current situation is. We'll give you what I would describe as preliminary recommendations on the sewer piece, or at least a short list for you to consider and come back and talk about. And we'll talk about some questions. So some terminology that I'm sure you're familiar with, but during the presentation, we take it for granted because we throw these terms around every day. Fixed fee, those are rate structures where everyone would pay the same amount of dollars per billing period regardless of usage. That is not Long Meadow. We use a fixed rate system, so we pay dollars per 100 cubic feet, which is essentially dollars per gallon for both water and sewer. We don't have an ascending rate structure, but that is something that some utilities use, i.e. the more water you use, the higher your rates may be. Base charge, you do have on the sewer side a fee per period, a fixed fee per period based on your meter size. So there is a minimum charge for sewer, even for those customers that might not use any water. And lastly, you have a term called a cap. So right now on the sewer side, you guys have a sewer cap that no one over a certain usage would pay a sewer fee in excess of that gallonage. So when we started this kind of concept with your staff, with Stephen and Mario and Pete and the rest of the guys, we basically said, what are the key questions that are being asked? Because that helps us kind of identify the focus of where we think it's going, and then you can certainly help us. But first and foremost, we ask ourselves the question, is the rate system that we have fair and equitable? And we like to define fair and equitable as does the middle 80%, does it work for those customers? It's really hard with the 5 to 10% of the population are at the low end and the high end to really balance different rate structures, so that's important. Next is, what effect would secondary meters have on the sewer rate structure? That is something that's been proposed or discussed in concept and a big part of this initial presentation. Another term that was presented that we were asked to look at was winter averaging. Winter averaging is basically taking a look at what is the consumption during the non-irrigation season and using that to extrapolate sewer usage towards the summer months. So that's something we'll present this evening. We'll talk about whether the cap is appropriate or whether that could be modified to 100 cubic feet. And lastly, what impact does II, infiltration inflow, have on sewer costs and i.e. sewer rates? That was something that isn't necessarily akin to this particular discussion, but as we understand it, is a topic that is of interest to the select board. So right now, you've got about 5,800 customers. Again, we're pretty much all on water and sewer with the exception of a few homes in town, almost all residential, not surprisingly, very few commercial customers. And Pete and the folks from DPW have been collecting monthly water data for all customers for 2 years. This is really great because when we get into trying to look at alternatives, we know exactly how much water you're using in winter months versus summer. And that should equip you to help make decisions moving forward. So again, right now on the water and sewer side, you have an enterprise fund that's managed separately from the general fund, very important element of managing your water wastewater systems. Again, we have a fixed rate system. We currently receive bills twice a year. The timing of those right now are such that meter readings are taken in February and August. Those of you jumping ahead when we talk about winter averaging and summer versus winter periods, that current schedule maybe isn't perfect for looking at some alternative concepts where it's right in the middle of the peak season, but something to come back to. And the water rate is currently $3.22 per 100 cubic foot, and sewer is $2.50 with that annual cap. So, one of the things when you get into these rate evaluations is where are we at and kind of how do we compare to other communities in the Commonwealth? Having done quite a few of these, and as a resident, I mean, I'm pleased to say that Long Meadow's well on the low side of the state median averages. That's good. It's also an indication that, based on the age of our community, that we probably have some deferred capital needs, which I know we've talked about in the last 10 years in other forums. So there are some deferred infrastructure needs that will surface as time moves on, but we're basically half on both sides. So again, our system is our system, and our costs are indicative of what our costs are. So it just helps to kind of know where we are versus other communities, but we're in a good spot. So some of the alternatives that we looked at when we did this project, we always start by including the no action alternative. In this case, you have a pretty good system. There may be people, again, on each end of the spectrum that don't feel it's equitable, but we start with that. We also present on the far side, what would it look like if we were in a fixed fee system? If every residential customer received the same dollars per billing period, what would that look like? And then in between, there's a whole bunch of scenarios. We could literally look at dozens, but we focused on 3. If we did have secondary meters, what might that look like without a sewer cap? And then 2 winter averaging scenarios. One would be a pure 6-month period, which would stay in line with your semi-annual billing, and also a quarterly concept where you'd really be looking at those 3 winter months. Those were the 5 alternatives. So just to kind of hammer through these real quick, I am trying to get through this quickly so we can kind of get into the meat of the discussion. The current rate system, again, this is the no action alternative. There would be no change to the cap. One thing that's of interest when you look at where we are right now relative to our usage as a community, the median water consumption is about 113 cubic feet per year. If we assume Long Meadow has about 2.6 people per household, probably a reasonable assumption. It's just under it's just under 90 gallons per capita per day, which is, people probably attest a little bit on the high side. But again, that's attributed to a lot of folks in town using water to irrigate. That isn't just for sanitary use. Another important observation as we move to other alternatives of consideration is that 17% of our sewer customers currently exceed the annual cap of 100 cubic feet. That's important when we start looking at how changes might impact folks at the high end. 7% of the customers, when you look at just their winter consumption, if you assume that they only had half the 110 in the winter period, go over that. So we have a lot of people, more than 5% that use excessive amounts of water in the wintertime. Again, excessive is a subjective term, but certainly they're high water users, to say the least. And then one thing that always comes up when we do these, and in some other communities, like Lenox and Great Barrington, there's a lot of second homes for people to vacation. Looking at our data, it looks like less than 1% of our customers are snowbirds that go away in the winter. I kind of wasn't sure where that was going to come out, but the data's the data. There may be people that go away for a period in the winter, but not a lot of them based on the data. So I'm not going to go through these charts, but the data's in the handout just in case you kind of want to reference statistically where percentiles of folks are, relative to their usage. Those are the next 2 slides there.
Well, I had a question.
Please.
At the 100th percentile, you have units consumed, and it has a ratio from 268 to 1,276. And so how many of that, so who are the number of big users? Is that like?
Those are all residential customers.
Oh, the residential?
Yeah. I mean, you could literally go through and you could pick them out. We didn't. It is what it is. It doesn't really change the the outcome or the data. It's just that there are geographically we didn't look if there's certain neighborhoods or anything like that.
Okay.
That's annual use that Tom's referring to. This is in not that slide, but this actually
it's the
slide
first
before
one.
that.
Was the first one, yeah. And so, like Glen Meadow, as a community, do they have, would their bill be one of the larger ones? I mean,
They're a commercial property.
they're considered
Yeah.
commercial property.
So
and
these are
that.
strictly, residential
family.
properties.
Okay, great. That's only, I don't know if you have anything else.
But Dave, this is, when it says number of units consumed, that's annually, that's not semi-annually.
That's correct. Annual, right?
Annual,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay, so,
Mhm.
and I guess we don't have the numbers. I was gonna say summer versus winter for each one of those we wouldn't have.
We do have in the memo, there's a breakdown by percentile for summer and winter for those scenarios.
Mhm.
Everybody kind of looks at data in different ways, and we try to present things as best we could in tables and figures to try to balance it out. But we can certainly flesh anything you have out relative to questions. So we
Yeah.
can come back to those two tables for sure.
Okay.
Just wanted to let you know that they were up there. One graphic, I guess, with my mind and how I'm wired is I like to see, based on the distribution, 0 to 100 percentile, where are you at now? And this is on figure 1 in the purple line. And you can kind of see some of these alternatives, how they might shake out. Right now you have a nice kind of curve that goes from 0 right up to about the 83rd percentile, as I mentioned, and then these sewer costs, is down laser, middle one, flattens out at about the 83rd percentile because of the cap on the sewer side.
Mhm.
And, as we talk about the other alternatives, you can see, but I think one thing that's worth noting is, we talked about your median being right there. Your average is higher than the median, not surprising, because you do have, even though it's a small percentage, there's people on that top 5% that just use a ton of water, and it pulls that average above the median, about 5 points
Mhm.
higher. So the next concept is the secondary meters without a cap. So, under this scenario, you'd retain your fixed rate system in concept. You would have no cap for sewer, but in theory, those residents that desire to put in a second meter would be able to do so. And as Pete explained, there would be kind of the 2 meters that would make it easy. There wouldn't have to be math. There are obviously administrative things that would come about, and we haven't kind of drilled down into that level. But the results and the observations is that the high water users would be most impacted by removing the cap, not surprisingly. It really doesn't impact folks, below the median, average, lower. It's all those technically above the 40th percentile where the change is, but most dramatically above that 83rd percentile without the cap. If you didn't put in a second meter, you'd be getting, billed for all your water. So it is what it is. I mean, they're black and white. At the end of the day, what James did is dollars are dollars. And you have a budget, and we have to develop a scenario to bring in revenue to meet that budget.
Dave,
So-
can I just correct something, not correct?
No,
Clarify-
please,
Clarify
please.
something you said.
Please.
You said above that cap, you'd be billed for all the water. The answer is you're always billed for all the water. You'll be billed for all the sewer associated with all the water.
That's correct,
And I
Mark.
think it's important that people understand, nothing we're doing here, that, to my understanding, talks about at all changing or limiting billing on water.
That's correct.
All we're talking about is the billing on sewer, and so, and as long as people understand that, correct?
No, it's tricky, and the terms get interwoven,
right,
but we use
right.
water data on both sides for water and sewer billing. So-
Right, but their water bill's
Correct.
not gonna go up or go down based on a second meter.
That's a good
The only thing that
distinction.
changes is their sewer bill.
Yes.
Okay.
So again, similar to the previous kind of set of figures with the secondary meters, you can see, one of the challenges, we don't know who's gonna put in second meters. So what James did was he said, hey, let's assume worst case that everybody from the 100th percentile started to put the meters in and work down, because that's the worst case scenario. And again, you still can keep your current rate structure at $2.50 per 100 cubic foot. The top 6% of your customers would have to put in second meters before you had to start changing the way you do business.
And can I, if I can ask James, that 6%, that top 6%, the incentive for people to put in a second meter, if we went that way, would be, in my opinion, be based on payback. Do you have a sense of, the lowest person of that, the 94th percentile person, what their payback would be for installation of a meter if the meter was, $1,000 or something like that to buy, install, and all that kind of stuff, the meter?
Right, and we didn't look at it as far as how many years it might take on what they're
Right.
saving before they recoup the costs across the board. But what we did do was just look at the top end, because originally when I looked at it, I said, well, theoretically, anyone could put this meter in. So we looked
Right.
at it across the board, but that would change the finances as opposed to if the top end had did it.
But
we
I
didn't
guess
look at a
my comments would be
recoup.
that instead of picking that 6% number, which is as good as any, you might go back and say, look, people who have a 5-year or less payback are likely to do it, and people more than a 5-year payback aren't, and then pick that 6%, that whatever that percentage is, based on a 5-year payback as opposed to basing it on just
It's-
6%. The number may come up 7.5%, it may come up 3%, it may come up 12, I don't know what it is, but I'm just suggesting some other rationale for picking that cut
Completely
up.
subjective, I would guess 2 to 5 years. I mean, if you had a finished basement, that could obviously impact how much work you had to do to replumb, things in the basement. But for some folks at that top end, it could only be a couple of years. It wouldn't take long.
Right.
There's some folks that would otherwise have a sewer bill that would be pretty dramatic.
Right.
But to get 6% of the customers to put in second meters would likely take several years. I mean, when you think about the reality of people thinking about something and doing it, I think it would take longer than we think.
But the bottom line is, you're saying that if 6% did, it would have minimal impact on revenue and the overall sewer rate.
Correct, because the total revenue would be the same. I mean, this is where that green line passes there. Again, the dollars are the dollars, and the people above that percentile are the ones that are gonna pay more. The people below, it's no impact. So if you're on that, lower 2/3 of the curve, your changes in your annual bill are negligible.
But the point is that I would think that if we were going to authorize a secondary meter, we'd either eliminate or start raising that 220 cap. It's kind of the carrot and the stick approach. And so the horizontal line you have there would start going away, and people would say, hey, I'm now, got a huge, I didn't have much of an incentive because I was capped at 220, but now if I'm not capped, all of a sudden I do have an incentive
Right.
to put in this second meter. And I don't know that show, unless I'm reading that wrong, that necessarily shows
No,
that.
the flat part, if you raise the cap, what would happen is the purple line would come up at a slope, and then the flatter
Right.
section would be narrower.
Right, but that would,
That would drive-
those
that would drive-
incentivized to do it would change, if you will, the geometry of, okay.
Of course. But again, when we go back to the fair and equitable, we're still, in all of these scenarios, so far as presented, we're really only looking at changes to the top 10 percentile roughly, significant changes. Again, those between the 45th or 50th percentile and 75, 80, there'd be a modest change. But those above could, there's folks that could have triple the bill, easy. If the cap was all removed,
Right.
you see where that line on consumption goes vertical, and you look back at the tables in the report.
Okay.
So the next one that we looked at was winter averaging. My understanding, representatives from the select board introduced this concept that they were familiar with from another region in the country. It's funny, there's a lot of different names for it, but the way you do business right now with your cap, you really do winter averaging. That 220, what you've tried to do over time, as we interpret it, is kind of look at, hey, what, in the winter, what do we really use the majority of the customers, and let's kind of extrapolate that. So, we recognize that, maybe people aren't flushing everything, obviously, during the irrigation season. So you kind of do that. Not surprisingly, when we look at some of these options, the curves don't change, Mark, as you kind of caught on to the dollars per gallon change, because you're billing for less gallons. But those with the sewer bill really aren't going to change for the majority of the customers, except that top 10 percentile. So right now, the biggest challenge with winter averaging is when our bills go out. So the whole February, August, August is right in the middle of what would otherwise be a summer period. So if we stayed in a semi-annual billing concept, we would likely have to shift that bubble, to an October through March, or, November through April concept to try to balance things. If you went quarterly, obviously the shift is only a month or two, and you could certainly do that. But again, I think some folks maybe anticipated we see more of the snowbirds, that we'd see some more dramatic things. We were shocked to see how many high users there were during the winter period. I don't know what my neighbors are doing in the winter with water. I didn't think there were that many indoor pools and such, but maybe it's just bigger families and excessive use. I don't know. But quite honestly, this is really the only time we've ever seen these high of a trends in all these rate studies we've done. So it's just interesting, if nothing else. When we look at the data trends for the winter averaging, those are both shown in the green and red dotted lines. As you can see, the distribution to about the 45th percentile is gonna be spot on for those customers in terms of total dollars per year for sewer. They start to diverge as you get a little bit higher than that. And this pushes the bubble over to about 93rd, 94th percentile where it goes vertical again. So this is a concept that could work. Again, I think you're probably closer there than maybe you thought with the system that you currently use. It would probably be a little bit more work, shifting your data set, but it's a valid alternative.
So Dave, in all these curves you're showing, the revenue for the town, if you will, is the area under the curve.
Exactly.
Okay?
It's spot on, yeah.
So this system that you show there with the lower, with the green dot dash below the purple line
Yep.
is lower revenue, and therefore, in order to be revenue neutral, the rate has to go up.
You gotta catch it above the purple line on the far right. Yeah,
Well,
you're looking at the mass under the line, you're right. And, you
right,
have-
so in order for that to go up, in fact, and I guess you did that in some documents, but not really in the curve, but it would be interesting to show that, not the green curve, shifted upward so that it had the same area under it as does the purple curve, which is true revenue neutral to the town. That way, people looking at this curve can say, gee, I'm in the 20th percentile. Currently, I pay $200, but shifted, I'm going to pay whatever the number comes up to be.
Yeah.
And it would be a good visual on the impact of that shift on individual annual costs. And that assumes that the town needs to pay the bills. I mean, we need
Right.
a revenue neutral kind of approach to our sewer system. So it's just a suggestion of the way.
Yeah, we can, and
I-
maybe offline, you can kind of help me understand, exactly what you want to do with those. But what we try to just basically
Right.
show
Well-
is below the 45th percentile, the bills would be the same under all three of
Right,
those
but what
scenarios.
I'm saying is, integrate the area under the curve.
Yep.
And then take the shape of the green curve, shift it upward, so the area under that new green curve is the same as the area under the purple curve.
It is.
Revenue
They-
neutral.
They are right
They're-
now.
Yeah, these are revenue neutral, these curves. So that's why the rate shifts to adjust
They all bring in the
accordingly.
same total
It
dollars
brings in
for
the
the
same total
town.
dollar. So those areas are gonna be equal under all four
Find the
alternatives.
boxes on the bottom. I think that'll help you.
So the boxes on the bottom?
Yeah, see,
Well, Mark talked about the rate. There is a 6-month and a 3-month where it does show the increase from 250 to 386, and then a 3-month to 420 for the sewer rate. Is that what you want people to see that?
Well,
So again, when you're on a 6-month winter average, your rate is gonna be higher than it is right now. You're using a winter 6-month period, so your dollars per gallon are gonna be higher because you're billing for less gallons. When you go to a 3-month winter average, your rate has to go up even higher because you're billing for even less gallons because you're using winter data. The total dollars that we have to collect for you to meet your expenses are the same for all of the alternatives.
so I just want to.
So what this basically tells us is, folks below the 45th percentile don't really do a significant amount of irrigation, that their winter consumption is pretty much like their summer.
Right, but this says that they're going to be paying essentially the same amount, when in fact they can't be paying the same amount, because their rates are going to go up from 250 to either 388 or to 420.
Because they're being billed for less
Their
gallons
their
based
gallon
on
is
their
less.
average winter consumption.
Right.
The total
So
gallons.
the concept with the winter averaging is, okay, what's going down the drain for sewer is essentially what we take in for water in the winter months. We're not washing the car, we're not filling the pool up, doing irrigation, et cetera. So in the winter, we use a lot less gallons. And that's essentially what some communities do, is they'll take the winter bill and use that usage as your sewer bill for the year round.
But in fact, I thought what you said was those people don't use any less in the winter or the summer. So if they use the same amount in either scenario, if the rate's going up 20%, their costs have got to go up 250 to 3.
The gallons went down by the same increment.
But you said that they didn't go down because they're using the same amount summer
They
and winter.
use less comparatively. They do use more in the spring and the summer, but it's not as much as once you pass that 45th percentile, that's where you start to see
The
the larger
differential.
spread. Yeah.
So so this curve is annual usage,
Yes,
or?
this is annual.
So how did you go from annual usage to that conclusion of seasonal usage?
Because for the 6 month, we looked at the October to March, your consumption that period, and we took that, your average consumption, and then you double it, because you're gonna pay that the same in the second billing period.
This doesn't make sense at all, because, I'll tell you what, because either, so you're assuming that it's 50/50, and then you're saying, but it's not 50/50.
Well, there's two alternatives, two ways you could look at it. You could do it over
You're
the
basing
6
your
month or-
bill for sewer based on, in those two cases, either the 6-month winter usage or the 3-month winter usage.
Yeah, I
So
understand.
you're billing for less gallons.
So let me just
No, I-
call timeout, because we're getting wrapped around the axle, because I think what they're trying to say is winter averaging isn't really a great alternative in the alternatives analysis that they're presenting. I think winter averaging is the one that is least viable.
There's a lot of baggage that comes with very minor changes to how you do business.
Right.
Right, no,
So-
and I heard
So why
that.
don't we just,
No, but because what I don't get is some of them saying, we're gonna raise the rates 20%, but don't worry, your cost won't go up. And I your cost won't go up because your volume goes down. And if your
But you're
volume,
getting all that volume at the high end too, though.
I'm looking at the people in the 10, 15, 20 to 30% range, those low-end users. Those
So the
low-end
bubble would only
users.
shift, Mark, if folks at the high end, their rates were coming down. They're not, they're going up. So that's why it can stay where it is.
the revenue bubble,
Yeah, the revenue bubble.
not the
You're
consumption
getting
bubble?
more dollars per customer at the high end, a lot more dollars if you remove that cap or you use winter average.
Because the winter
Yeah.
usage is much higher than you
And we have
would
so
thought
many
it was.
customers that still use,
Okay.
yeah. It is counterintuitive. I mean, when we sat down as a workshop, we kind of, is this right, Pete? You know, and
Even when the curves worked out to be right, matched up, I would have expected some more difference between the 3 and the 6 month, and that's just how the numbers work out with the consumption.
All right.
so the last one, the throwaway alternative is, what it would look like if we all had the same bill. And I think without getting into all the details, it's pretty obvious. If everyone paid a fixed fee for sewer, it might be perceived as being fair and equitable in the middle. It would certainly hurt those customers that are either, low users or seniors or fixed income. We certainly don't endorse it, but I think it's important to show, what it would look like as an alternative. Again, compared to the other communities, relatively modest, but.
Can I ask, Stephen, I think it's more for Paul Pasturzik. One of the comments that, Dave, you said was, changing the increment to get to this better winter averaging. How does our billing period be impacted by the fiscal year that we try to run and getting all our revenue collected within the fiscal, I mean, maybe a better way to ask Paul Pasturzik is our fiscal year requirements put a real constraint on Dave's suggestion that if you really wanted to do this right, you'd have to change the billing cycle?
I think potentially the first year you might have to do some tweaking because you may not get either the cycles, if it's 2 cycles, you could probably work it so it works out. But if you went to 4, you'd have to be sure to get those 4 cycles in the fiscal year, and that may not be possible in that first time around, and you may have to do some finagling to get that
Special
first
billing in
year
one
in
year.
place. To get that first year in place, but after that, everything would fall in place after year 1.
Okay, thanks.
So can I jump in on that, on the billing thing?
Yeah.
One of the things we talked about, that Paul reminded me, is that there was a public policy decision made some years before my arrival, for sure, to time the water bill, reading and billing, so you weren't getting all of your bills, taxes, water, sewer, excise taxes, all at the same time, and then right at the end of the year.
Right.
And so if you start to, and this is one of those things where, as we circle back around, the theme that I came away with was, why put all this effort into making changes when it's not really going to affect very many people and it really isn't going to change much in the way of, the financing of the system? We didn't start out, and I'll be honest with you, we didn't start out steering towards the do-nothing approach. I think we've taken a sincere approach at saying, what's the better way to do it? I've always said that if there's a better way to run the railroad, we should look into it. When we met and we kind of went through the data, it was clear that Could you affect some change by doing secondary meters or something like that? Sure. Is the level of effort needed to go into that worth what you're going to get out of it? And I think what my takeaway was no, especially when you look at, if you do the irrigation meter, if you do the irrigation meters, you have to lift the cap. That's going to affect some people who use a bunch of water without doing irrigation. And then you also then, there's a lot of administrative things that go along with secondary meters, as inspections and readings and things like that. And then the other thing is you have to move your billing schedule to really reflect, the peak demand of irrigation, and now people are going to be getting their bills all at the same time. And so when you started putting the pieces together about, geez, when you make this change, oh, by the way, here's something we didn't really think of, the billing, you run counter to the public policy. So when we went through all of this, and I give Dave and James, I was gonna say Jason, it wasn't Jason, James a lot of credit. They really went through in great detail. We're like, geez, maybe we really don't need to force a change here, because the way we're doing it now works pretty well, and for lack of a better term, cost benefit of changing things didn't seem to be there for the greatest good for the greatest number of utility customers. That was my takeaway.
Yeah. Paul, is our cap of 220 per billing period?
No, it's annual.
It's annual, so that makes a big difference, because one of the things they reported was there's an awful lot of people who seem to be using high amounts of water during the winter, when apparently they're not irrigation, and they're getting a break on sewer fees, when one can assume, bad to do, but one can assume most of that water is probably going down the sewer, right? Now, it could be for some other reason, but that's an interesting.
Yeah, the data was, I mean, and I'm going to give Pete Thurber and the DPW some credit, and actually Richard Foster too, because it was at really Richard's urging that we developed the ability to read monthly, and it helped inform this data in a way that we really didn't have in the past. So our data set is much more advanced than it was in past efforts to analyze our rate system. And that's how we know this stuff now, which was a revelation, really. For me it was, and since all I know about this is what I've heard you guys say in the past, I think it was different than we thought we were going to get, and that's a result of having better data in smaller increments in terms of duration. So monthly instead of semi-annually. So that, and like I said, that's where, after going through all of this, to find a better way to do it, to end up with, geez, we could do something, but you don't really make much of a change by doing it. And you guys all know, making those kinds of changes at the local level is usually an enormous amount of time, energy, resources. 5 minutes after secondary meters, get authorized, someone's going to be connecting their hot water heater to one. I mean, it's just, and then we have to go and do inspections and cross, all that stuff. That's all going to follow with making that kind of change. And what do we gain out of doing all of that? And I think precious little is the outcome.
Well, Stephen, not to be argumentative, but your comments are dead on in the collective. Mm-hmm. But to those individual users who perceive, I have irrigation and therefore I'm being overcharged, it may in fact, and does in fact, make a difference. And if they so choose to impact their bills by putting in a secondary meter or whatever it is, we could facilitate that with little or no, based on what I'm saying, impact on everybody else. Because collectively, you're absolutely dead on, but there's always those people who say, I could, and I think what we're hearing tonight is, it turns out it's not just your not just your summer irrigation. You can put in a secondary meter and watch what's going to happen anyway. Your bills are still going to go up as we raise the ceiling.
So when I was talking to Dave about how to approach this, I said, one of the things you're going to hear, and I do agree in principle with what you just said, is there is a principle of, if I'm watering my grass, I shouldn't have to pay a sewer charge because it's not going down the sewer.
Right.
When you get, though, how do you develop a policy mechanism to address that principle? That's when you get into the kind of the minutia of it, and the software changes, the trainings, the this and that, the death by 1,000 cut cost incursions are going to be paid for by everybody else to benefit a very small number of customers who are going to benefit from this. And honestly, Mark, that's my thing. It's not. I agree that we started this whole endeavor to try and find a way to address that principle. And like I said, when you look at who's going to pay to create that system and who's going to benefit, everybody's going to pay to implement that system, and only a very small number of people are going to benefit. And is it worth doing?
It's,
And that's the question.
yeah.
That's the
Well, I guess-
semi-non-rhetorical
Yeah,
question.
well, the other thing would be that if we set up a system that encouraged people to use more water, would that be a good thing also? You know, do we really want, is it really that important that we let people think, oh, I can get a better deal if I get the second meter, so maybe I'll get a watering system? And, how important is that to our community to have that? But as I look at this table number 1, it looks like only about 15% of the people would even use this cap. If we cap it at 220, am I right?
Yeah, 17% currently above that cap. Yeah.
We have the
Yeah.
cap in place.
17% of the people get a break already, because once they get to that point, no matter how much water they use, they aren't paying anything extra.
Which, Tom, is
Which,
potentially arbitrary based on the lower 83% subsidizing the upper 17%, for whatever
Right.
reason.
right, but
Because not all of that upper 17% is all irrigation water. We don't know where it's used.
So I need to
Yeah.
apologize to David and James. They have 3 more slides.
Go
That's
ahead.
okay. I mean, I think we're kind of, Stephen summarized really where we're at right here.
But it looks like we're, according to your figures, we're actually treating 36% of the irrigation as it is through I&I, right?
Yeah, why don't we get through the last 2 slides on I&I?
It's a little different. I almost want to like turn the chapter when we talk about that, because it really doesn't impact this discussion. It impacts whatever you do is for business.
Yeah. So the last 3 slides deal with inflow. Is that an emergency, or is it time to change classes? See, you want to change, gears that aren't the class bell is not
This is
ringing.
to keep you awake when you're talking to engineers.
That sounds a lot more ominous than class bell. So the I&I system was something that had been talked about by Richard as an impact on this discussion. So that's another thing where we got the appropriation from town meeting. We've been engaged in setting up some metering and discussing I&I flow. It just happened to dovetail with this conversation, not coincidentally, but somewhat coincidentally. And that's another thing that was illustrative to me. I was convinced that I&I was a factor in this. And it turns out the data doesn't really bear that out, that I&I is really not a factor for consideration when looking at the water and sewer rate policy making. So that's one thing, again, through this process, we have learned that it's not really a statistically significant consideration. So if you guys want to just whip through those last 3 slides.
We will
Well, take your
crank right
time.
through these. No, it's okay. I mean, infiltration and inflow.
yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's basically groundwater rainfall that enters the sewer system. What does it mean for Long Meadow? So the state uses a threshold when we look at a term called unit II. So we're looking at like gallons per cross-sectional area of pipes. The state uses a threshold of 4,000 gallons per day per inch diameter mile as what they consider excessive II. Okay, to benchmark things, standards for brand new pipes, literally, from Mass DEP and EPA, 200 to 400 gallons per day per inch mile. So even in a brand new system, we accept that this essentially French drain that we're putting in the streets is going to receive some II. Long Meadow, over the course of the last 3 years, has averaged 700 gallons per day per inch mile. So, in addition to doing a lot of the rate studies, we do a lot of II work. I think, Long Meadow is kind of geologically 2 different towns. The eastern 2/3 is very sandy and well drained. The corridor along Route 5, there are pockets where there's sand, but a lot of clay underneath that, marine clay, and the groundwater table sits there. So the majority of our town and infrastructure is in good shape. When we talk about how II impacts Long Meadow, really what it comes down to is your budget. You've got round numbers, about a $1.9 million sewer budget. Pete, please chime in if I misspeak here. Just kind of going through this quickly. You pay Springfield, rough numbers, about $600,000 a year on the sewer side. Okay, Springfield has a formula where they take the gallons of each of the member communities and they prorate that for O&M and for capital costs. Okay, so 30% of your budget for sewer annually is tied to how much you pay Springfield. Within that formula, is it true, yes, if you removed II, that you could reduce your pro rata share of the formula with Springfield? Yeah, but what I'd argue right now is the dollars per gallon to remove the II is likely not going to be super cost effective. So what you've done in the last 10 years is you've replaced 5% of your sewer system. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a heck of a lot of pipe. And you've significantly cut down your flows from where they were pre-2008. You're in a capital pattern or program where you televise your sewers before you pave streets, and it's really smart. You fix the pipes that are structurally compromised. I think that that's the best approach for Long Meadow moving forward. So could you reduce your costs for associated with II? Yeah. II sounds like a lot. 36% of my flow is II. That sounds like a lot of II, but when you look at it and you look at how many miles of pipe we have, boy, it's like just a ton of tiny, death by 1,000 paper cuts. So, if we had big weepers and bleeders where we could go, low-lying fruit, we would go do it. And the guys already do that for sure. I've seen it. So I just think that that's probably not the most appropriate way to try to go, deal with things. And our costs are already, even it might feel like it, really low for water and sewer per residential customer. So I tried, Stephen, to get that into a 2-minute.
No, Dave, I appreciate that. Can I ask you just to complete the sentence that you started? You said 30, or I was hoping you would complete the sentence you start. That you said 36% of our sewer flow is the result of infiltration.
Yeah, it's about
Okay,
It's
okay.
about a third. Yep.
What percentage of our overall 1.9 million sewer budget does that represent? In other words, you said 1.9% annual budget, 600,000 is to Springfield, but of that 600,000 to Springfield, only a portion of that is actual water treatment, related to volume. Part of it's related to their capital costs, and so
They apportion capital and O&M the same way. I was surprised to see that.
It is? So,
The same way.
Mark, I would have thought it would
so it's 36% of $600,000.
It's about 11% of
11%
the over.
in their stuff.
Yeah.
It's about,
10% of the full budget.
It's 11% of, the 30% when you look at the II component, brings the 30% down to about 10% roughly. So it makes sense. If 30% of your money is tied to flow that you pay Springfield, and it's a third of
okay, so it's
your
okay.
flow, about 10%.
Oh,
I
yeah,
would say
it's a third of a third, not a third of the overall.
Okay, it's a
it would
third,
be
yeah.
heroic to remove 25% of the II in our system, and it would come at a cost of millions of dollars. So
Tens of millions of dollars.
Well,
fair enough, Mario.
what you're saying is that it's at 700 gallons per day per inch diameter mile. If we did a whole lot of work, we might get down to 250 or 300 or 350.
We've
As a
already
number, might
taken
cut it in
ourselves
half.
off that. We've taken ourselves
Okay,
off the
so-
vertical part of the curve. We're down on the flat side, so we could spend a lot of money and not really.
Okay.
It's important to fix
Yeah.
pipes that are broken. That's great.
Right.
But we don't have a lot of leaky pipes, at least not in a lot of areas. It's not chronic for sure.
Okay,
Worst
so-
case, it's acute.
And what we don't know is how much of this is things that are not leaking, but actually
Yeah.
piped into the system, like people's gutters who go into
Yeah.
the sewer system and
Some
sump pumps and things like
Yeah.
that.
It's fair to say that we always want to be we want to be doing a little bit better than Wilbraham and East Long Meadow and Agawam.
Right, okay.
And, Springfield is what it is. It's an old city, and they're always going to be fighting II in a much different battle than we are. It's just the reality of a 100-year-old pipe, so.
And does the water table really, is that the biggest battle?
Yeah.
Would that be the biggest
Yeah.
battleground?
I
We
mean,
can't change
Where we have
that.
that sand and it's 20 feet deep, that water's gone within, minutes, hours, most case a day after it rains. Where we have, Maple Road, I remember construction out there, that was pretty sketchy, where you had 5 feet of sand on top of marine clay. The water wasn't going anywhere when it went down 5 feet. It was just going to sit there. So,
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's time for our next class? No.
yeah.
Is there, so is any other questions from the select board on this? Well, this was a great presentation.
Well,
It's
Tom, can I-
great that we've
so-
gotten all
so-
that move stuff forward, yeah.
So we're still left with a couple of options here, and I guess what I haven't heard is, I'm the technical guy, and if it was up to me and you didn't live in Long Meadow, it wasn't your bill, where we might be headed with this, because I did hear what we've got isn't too bad,
No,
and, but I did also hear this recommendation of 110 cap on sewer rather than 220 to take into account these high winter users or something like that.
okay.
And I'm just wondering what the relative,
Mark, you seem like a flow chart guy, so I'm gonna give you a series of recommendations. The first one would be no action. Don't change what you have, okay? If you didn't like the no action alternative, the next suggestion would be, can we tweak the cap that we have? And I think the challenge with tweaking the cap we have, Pete, is gonna be the timing of the February, August
Yeah,
bills.
exactly.
So-
The billing would definitely have to be changed.
So that would come with that alternative, that step two. If you didn't like option one, step two would be tweak the billing periods and consider an alternative cap, okay?
yeah,
If you don't like alternative two, then I think you're down to, okay, well, now we need to talk about playing around with second meters. Again, our job is to present you with unit costs that balance the budget. Your job is to make policy decisions, but those are our recommendations, those are the short list. We do not recommend the fixed fee alternative. We do not recommend the winter averaging. I think both of those alternatives, we could solve the problem for 2 or 3% of the population and create a much bigger problem for that 80% in the middle. It's hard to get these things balanced so that everybody's happy. And right now, in the last dozen of these that we've done, this is the quietest we've really ever had an audience on each end of the spectrum. So there may be some, I'm sure, that are feeling that things aren't equitable, but this is pretty balanced and equitable, and your staff does a good job kind of managing the resources, not surprisingly, but.
Tom, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
The 220 cap, because that's your next thing after no action, I don't know what the process was by which that number was reached. Is there a process by which a better number could be determined?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
in theory, we look at the winter consumption and we don't see those customers that go vertical even in the winter. Usually you kind of see, the majority of folks, in the winter, there's high water users, but they trend off, they cap out. Here it just keeps going. So again, that's normally how we would do it, and if in the winter period it looked like, oh, okay, everybody's under 150, maybe we say, okay, let's see what a cap would look like at 300. But in that middle number two alternative, if you did adjust your timing of your season, the August, February, if it became, March, October, something like that, then at least you could, if you didn't want to mess with the cap, you could say, now we have a cap per the summer period. In the winter, you're paying all your bill. I mean, that would be a concept. That too would probably have folks at the high end saying, why is my winter sewer bill 3 times what it was before? But hey, stop using all that water. I mean, I don't know how else you really deal with it. It's a pickle for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Very informative.
Thanks for your
It's-
patience this
It's
evening.
nice that we've done some, our own folks have done some legwork on this to give you some good numbers to work with. Stephen?
I guess and Mark, this is really pointed in your direction, because you've been on this topic for longer than anybody else on the board. I guess what I would ask for is, would you be willing to make a motion to memorialize the policy decision to accept the do-nothing option, so we can kind of put this topic to rest, at least for the time being?
I absolutely would, but because there's somebody not here who really feels very strongly another way, I'd like to get more people involved with. I mean, I hear it. There's data here I didn't see. I mean, I'll be glad to do that. I just wonder
No, I
if we're
think
gonna-
you're right, Mark.
So
I think
I'll leave this to somebody else. I think it's interesting. I got to tell you though that the revelation of high winter use of people not paying sewer fees make me want to think about, do we look somehow at addressing that issue? And I don't know how, because it does get involved with, maybe these people start irrigating their lawn day one of the new, seriously, and it could really be irrigation.
Yeah.
And they irrigate their lawn from day one to the last day of that 6-month period, and if they do,
Well, if they do, they're doing it between December and February too. That's the crazy thing,
right, but,
Yeah.
or we address it, but, I mean, I'm fine with it. I think it's, we got more data than we ever had before, but I'll leave it to Tom or to Bill.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel.
I would be prepared to make a motion and prepared to vote. I feel a little funny that there's the three of us, and I don't know
Yeah,
how more, I know that Richard has some strong.
yeah,
Well, I guess
Richard had
what
big
I would say
investment in
is,
this,
and we spent a lot of time, a lot of staff time, a lot of time at meetings on this. And I'm glad we did. I think what we've learned, and I think and the presentation's been great, it really has been a good learning thing. If all of you feel the same way, then it doesn't really matter when we vote on it. And if Richard wants to, during select board comments, talk about the foolishness of the vote we just took, or, whatever, he got the packet as well, he can do that. But I just feel like, because that's gonna, I mean, what you're asking for is yet another agenda item on this and yet more staff time on it. I don't care either way. I just was like, if we all kind of feel the same way, let's just put it to bed and move on.
Go ahead, Bill.
I make a motion that we keep the same system we have now, we cap it at 220 and a fixed rate system. And we're not gonna be discussing rates for a while yet.
Yeah, so maintain status quo until the next.
Bill, can you just add the word sewer rate system to that? Because
Sewer rate
that's all
system.
we've been talking about, not the
Yeah.
water.
Correct. It's the status quo on the sewer rate billing system, capped at 220 annually, and keep the fixed rate system.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, open for discussion? Any discussion? I just, I think I feel, and like Mark was saying, it really, people will be shocked. I think, Richard has put a lot of time into this winter averaging thing. I'd kind of like to take him on board with this. So I think I'd have a hard time, supporting the motion. Is that the truth? Probably
Well,
just
I think one thing,
straightforward.
we've got more data than we've ever had before. Or-
Yeah. No, I think
I don't
it's a
think we have
good-
more
it's
data. I
good
think
data.
we've looked at it differently
Yeah.
and harder than we ever had before, some of the.
And I would be open to looking at, some of the alternatives with changing the cap. Also, I think that would be,
Yeah, I think if I may,
Yeah.
Tom, I think like I said, I'm looking to memorialize this so it's not a continuing open-ended conversation. That doesn't mean that we're never going to talk about it again. I think it's just for the most recent run that we've had on this, kind of put a capstone on it, and then when we talk about water and sewer rates, we can talk to Richard about and Marie about the data and everything we've learned. I'll be honest, I talked to him about it briefly last time I spoke with him. He didn't express concern that he wasn't going to be here. I think he's always been the type that the show must go on. But it's more just, can we turn the page on this and just at a future date when we feel like the data is changing or some of the circumstance changes, we can come back and look at it. But right now it was, pretty unambiguous about what the right thing to do was.
all right. Well, I think that there's two legitimate votes on the table. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Okay. Those opposed? So it passes. We'll move forward on this. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in.
Thank you very much.
And this is
Dave,
good data.
can you email Debbie the PowerPoint so she can get it to us
Of course,
electronically?
yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, Debbie, you can just send that out, actually.
Okay, and we move on to new business as we put this one to bed for a while. And the next would be the Charter Review Committee request that we have a letter that to be to the boards and committee chairs on behalf of the Selects Board, asking them to give input on the town charter, to have them look over any specific areas of the charter that would refer or affect their committees, or any additional responsibilities, including the reviewing the composition, the responsibilities of boards and committees, reviewing the legislative procedures and the administrative organization and financial procedures, and then to, have a response by September 30th. And if they had any questions about this, they can also contact Stephen Crane. So this is a letter that came out in our packet.
It's similar to the long-range plan.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
and we'll get the same kind of response, but
Yeah, I
do
think.
we need a motion to send this letter, or just a consent? I think consensus, send the letter.
Okay, so
Send the
I don't
letter.
know if it said what you wanted to say, but the basically.
Send the letter, and let the charter committee word the letter, and just put your signature
They
at the
can
bottom of it.
follow, oh, we have a letter.
Well, no, I
Right,
think just,
okay.
I wouldn't let the charter committee word the letter. I mean, and I'll be honest, I mean, I was there when they made the request, so this is as close as, I don't have a lot of pride of authorship. I just think they want the select board to make the request like they did the boards and committees, because some of the same people,
All right.
the charter committee is many of the usual suspects, so they get the long-range planning
Right,
letter, and so they want to get the same kind of request. And so I just, if, with consensus, we can have Tom send that.
Okay,
Send it
so
out.
you're up, we'll send this out, and hopefully they'll get some good feedback. All right. So the next order of the agenda is really select board charter discussion. And, you know, in terms of guidance for the select board, or for the review committee, you know, we could have a little discussion. I know initially when Stephen asked me about this, I said, well, I think it would be good to have, for them to have a systematic approach. There's 9 sections of the town charter. There's 8 people on the board. Maybe each person could have one section that they would just review each of those topics and come back to the main group. The 9th section is really had a lot to do with the transition. And it looks like that one, you know, as they review, they might say, well, you know, we don't really need to talk about how the transition from 2 members, or from 3 members of the select board to 5 members, it really needs to be maybe included in the current charter. But it must have been needed at that point. So that was my initial impression, is that I'd like to see them hopefully review each section and then, you know, come through with specific areas that would need updating. You know, because it would be a shame if they just focused on specific areas and then missed some section of it that really should be just eliminated.
So I guess I'm gonna reverse myself, because I feel, when I put this on, I was not aware there were gonna be,
2 people missing.
on
Yeah.
penalty kill, for the meeting.
Yeah.
So this is one I do feel like the whole board should be here for, because I think what the charter committee is really looking for is a specific set of policy issues, like basically as if the select board received this letter and had this discussion and reported back its findings to the charter review committee. That was kind of the intent of the discussion. Since I didn't feel like the select board needed to get the letter, because we've been talking about this for a long time.
Yeah.
But they are really looking for something organized. I will note that it's not really that time sensitive. They have, at their next meeting, I think they are gonna do some kind of development of their own policies and procedures that they will present to the select board for approval. So they're not necessarily diving into weighty charter issues just yet. So, you know, if you guys wanted to give them a start, you know, they're meeting tomorrow night. If you wanted to hold off, you could do that too.
The point is, though, Stephen, the extent of what they can do is somewhat limited because they're a committee and not a commission. So they can, you know, they can recommend changes that can be accomplished through town meeting votes or actions by the select board, but nothing that needs a rewrite of the charter.
But they can also recommend that the select board, you know, call for a charter commission to be elected to really rethink the form of government. I'm not saying they're going to, but that could be one of their recommendations.
Well, not unless we change their direction. Their direction is recommend, bylaw change, recommend minor changes or tweaks to, not tweaks, but changes to the current charter. Nowhere does it say, and oh, by the way, recommend to the select board that we change the form of government. I don't think we ever put that in there.
Well, they're not going to want to do a lot until they
Right, they get the input from, right, but, you know, if somebody's saying, gee, it's really burdensome to have, you know, appointees made in this way, and it's really, you know, I mean, that, like Tom said, they can go through piece by piece, but they're going through the current charter as opposed to saying, I'm going to start with a fresh piece of paper, and what would I want as a charter?
Well, the boards and committees thing was something that is going to end up being the focus of theirs by virtue of their charge.
Right.
But there's not a lot in the charter document about boards and committees, and you know how they're appointed, how many we have. I mean, most of that stuff's done by policy versus bylaw. some are done by bylaws, some are in the charter, but a lot of it's kind of like, you look at the energy committee, that's neither in the charter nor in the bylaws. So that's one of those things that I think they want specific guidance, but I'm suggesting that to get the most out of them, the board will need to give them some specific guidelines, or not guidelines, some specific areas of analysis that you're gonna want them to look at, on top of I think a cover-to-cover review of the charter itself, that'll, I think, give them some pathways into deeper issues, but we don't want them not looking at something that the board specifically wants them to look at. But again, I think that it's not, they're impaneled for a year, they just started, so if the board wants to take a couple of meetings to sort this out, I just wanted to get the conversation started.
Bill, do you have any thoughts?
I kind of feel that they need to get a feedback first, and then their charge was kind of to direct their own activity and how they saw fit to review the bylaws. And I'm not really prepared to direct them to do anything, you know, other than how they see they should do it.
I think what happened, to be honest with you, is in the first meeting, they weren't really sure how to take a step forward, and so they asked, could we get some guidance from the select board? And like I said, I do think it's fair to say, I agree with you, you guys put them together to say, tell us what you think your ideas are, but it's fair to say, hey, listen, we've got a certain number there's no committee recall provision. You know, that's come up in the past. Could you just look at what other towns do for recall of appointed board and committee, not elected, but appointed board and committee members? Do some research on that. Like, that's like, and that's just an example, not to say that that's one of the ones the boards have come up with. I'm just trying to give you an example of something that they were kind of not sure how to get started.
So,
I'm sorry, I think that Tom's idea then is logical, is that if I were in that group, I'd get together and say, okay, here are these sections of the bylaws, why don't you everyone take this, study it, come back next meeting with recommendations, and then bounce it around that way. That'd be a logical way to start.
the other thing we might do is invite them to a select board meeting or a special meeting with select board meeting with this committee, just to go through things kind of jointly. We'll all kind of go through it. Here's what we were thinking about in this section. Here's what we were thinking about in that section. So we can go through in the course of an hour or so, just 10 minutes on each section, or an hour and a half, and go through it with them.
Yeah.
That might give them a little bit more guidance, as opposed to just, here you go off and figure it out.
So how do you guys feel about the kind of, cover-to-cover thing? I mean, the charter is not really all that long a document, and so when Tom first mentioned this to me, I thought, okay, well, page 1,
Table of contents.
yeah, table of contents, looks good. Existence and authority, yep, we are the town of Long Meadow, got it, good. I mean,
Right.
you check, and then go
Right.
through the whole thing, and then you may hit something where you're like, time of meetings. Well, we know that that's an issue from people complaining, so why don't we pull out of the charter, grab that bylaw, and look at the bylaw while we're on that section, and go cover to cover, and then figure out, okay, well, what did we miss? And so that, and like I said, this is an evolving thing. It's not that they don't want to do it; they just want to do it right and be somewhat efficient. And they are going to operate as a committee of the whole. So they opted to not do kind of splinter groups. They want to really group think most of it first. So I think minimally, if I hear consensus on maybe just go through the charter kind of page by page, and then look at the bylaws when they hit something that they think is of concern. That, I think, will get them started.
And you mentioned also that there are some policies that are, and so
Yeah.
would they be able to get those written policies? Are those
Sure.
written, or, yeah?
Insofar as we have them, they can
So-
get them.
Just to
Yeah.
to do that. And then I guess the other side too is, like Mark was saying, we would encourage them to come to the board if things start to develop and they say, are we really on track here? Because we're discussing about something that may be different than what we think our mission is supposed to be. And so it would be nice to have that open door where we would meet with them maybe several times during the year and just invite them, to here, I would think would be a good spot. And they could just say, well, this has come up and this come up. And then as a board, we can make a decision about is that something we want you to move on at this point? Do we need to consider it a little more? Can you work on something else? Maybe we'll get back to that. Or that's something we don't want you to work on. So, all those things could come up. And so it's good that they're looking for feedback from the board, and, let's try to keep that door open. And so we'll talk more about it in our next meeting. Hopefully we'll have full membership, so that would be great.
They are meeting tomorrow night, although I won't be there. I think I may ask someone else from town administration to go. In my place, I have to go to the planning board.
Okay.
But I think I will report back to them that there was some consensus that a page-by-page review is a good place to get started. Is that fair?
Yeah, systematic. They could split up the 8 people, each one could take a section, and then for the 9th section, they can just get to that at the end. So great, good. And so our next item is this street closure approval for the Center School 5K race.
I move we approve the street closure along Meadow Street on October 28th, 2017, no rain date for Center School 5K race.
Okay, is it seconded?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay, approved, so that's set. Any subcommittee reports this evening? No, I think we caught them last time. Then I believe it's time to look for a motion to adjourn.
Don't you love this time of year?
I move we adjourn.
Okay, second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen who've been watching, I hope you had an interesting evening, keeping up on town business. Thank you very much. See you next Monday, or 2 weeks from Monday, 2 weeks.